I'll give you a date. October 1954 is when we mastered what's called gravity control. And we then began to make man-made UFOs. Now, this astonishes people. I go, absolutely, this is true, and we can prove it. So that then opens up a whole question. How much of the phenomenon that people have ascribed to ET has actually been staged by those covert operations?
It almost has me thinking, do you believe or do you feel that humanity in times of past has already been in contact with these extraterrestrial races?
For sure. I think all through the Americas, if actually, the Celtic with the Stonehenge, the pyramids in South America and North America, Native people talked about the star people and their contact. I think globally, we've never been alone, and there has been contact for millennia.
Dr. Stephen Greer, welcome on Just Tap In. Good to see you too, brother. And I wanted to ask you, just to start off, what is one of the most important truths that you feel that is being revealed right now most strongly in humanity?
Well, I think the bigger truth is that we're not alone in the universe, and the part of it is being missed is the motto of this organization. It's one universe, one people. One of the problems with humans is that we tend to break into various factions and then go into warfare and conflict. This is a neurobiologically based in our primate chimpanzee, 98% of our DNA. And the other part of us has to rise to the higher angels of higher consciousness, where we realize that we're all one people, not just on Earth, but in the universe. And as the person who founded the global disclosure movement that's now reached this kind of crescendo, we're about to have all this breakout. We can talk about it. The big problem isn't going to be, people getting their heads around the fact that we're not alone in the universe. It's going to be the battle for the minds and hearts of humanity. And that is, do we go the path of the past, which is endless conflict around various differences, or do we rise to a higher understanding that results in universal peace on Earth and peace in space? And that's the big challenge of the day. And that's not discussed mostly at all in either the political or UFO circles, because people are still at the, let's say, kindergarten level of kicking the tires on UFOs. And the bigger issue, not that that's not important, and we'll get into the technologies and why all that's very important and why the whole subject's been banned and kept secret. But the bigger issue is going to be, I think very soon, is how we as a people come together around understanding this, and do we use this as a sort of galvanizing moment of unity, that there's life that goes forever in the universe? Or are we going to use that, which is 99% of ufology, quite frankly, the narrative that there's us and them, and we need to fight them, and they're the good ones and they're the bad ones, and they're the cowboys and the Indians, and there's basically the whole UFO subculture is one vast cesspool of interspecies racism, as I see it. Having grown up a child in the South when we still had Jim Crow laws and black and white water fountains, I don't see any difference between 99% of the UFO take on this subject, where the narrative becomes the good ones and the bad ones and this and that, because that's exactly what we did with racism and homophobia and misogyny and everything else. So one of the big challenges, I think, is for us to begin to understand what the nature of intelligent life is and what the foundation of consciousness is. And then we realize it's a universal constant, and that's the point of oneness, that the point of oneness between humans and non-human intelligent beings is that we're all conscious and awake, and that field of consciousness is a deep spiritual state that you can experience, and then you realize that that is your foundation for peace and oneness, as opposed to division and conflict. So I think that is paramount right now. It's not talked about much at all, because people are still trying to, when I go up to Capitol Hill and I'm, with people in the Senate or House, or people at the White House, which is right up the road here from me, down the road a mile. What I found is that there's a huge problem with people, still at the stage of, well, what is a UFO? And do they exist? And of course, that should have been settled and answered in 1945. But here we are still, at sort of the elementary level. But meanwhile, in covert programs and amongst the extraterrestrial peoples, things are coming to a head that the public doesn't understand. And quite frankly, the Congress and the president don't fully grasp yet. So that's one of the big tasks we have ahead of us, is this big educational, iterative process over and over and over again. Because each time there's a new president or a new leadership in the House or the Senate, you kind of have to start all over. We'll get into that in a moment.
Our world is shifting faster than ever, and it's so easy to feel small in the middle of all of this. Imagine being part of a movement, a tribe that is not just talking about the change, but actually living it. That's why I created The Deep Dive, a living spiritual ecosystem where every single day we go on a journey to remembering our most authentic self. Our members have joined from all walks of their awakening, and it's been such a blessing to witness all of the soul relationships that are already forming. As a community, we start every day with simple, powerful activities, and we're beginning to start envisioning the kind of world that we want to experience. This is way more than exclusive content or just another spiritual Netflix. This is about integration and leaving behind a legacy. If you're ready to move beyond knowing into becoming, then visit the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now to learn more. I'd be honored to co-create history with you. And Dr. Greer, if you were to take us from kindergarten to maybe high school or even college, how would you walk us to that level of understanding, as the masses could understand this in a way that is pinpoint what you've discovered in your life?
What's interesting is I had contact when I was 8 years old. So this is, I just turned 70. So it's almost 2/3 of a century of experiencing this. So I have that perspective on it, and it's a long perspective. I think the main problem when I first encounter general public scientists, people not familiar with the subject, is to get down to basics, like what it is, what are we talking about? So the modern term is UAP. It used to be UFO. Before that, it was flying saucers. So
it's evolved quite a lot.
It's evolved. Now, that evolution in nomenclature and terms has been designed by psychological warfare experts at the CIA. I'll be quite blunt. It's really an obfuscating term. For I said for years, there's no such thing as an unidentified flying object. A, we know what they are, they're identified. B, they don't fly in any aerodynamic sense. They go from point A to B using very advanced physics that basically bends space-time. And we can talk about that. And then the only part of the term that's true is that they're objects. But even that isn't quite accurate, because they can actually drop out of space-time and dematerialize and reappear at another point in space-time. So they can be in that in-between field. They're in a non-matter, beyond what we would call normal energy and matter, and what the mystic would call the near astral. It's a very subtle energy field. So these ET craft can go from full-on 3D solid into that other state, move across vast distances, or be hovering outside your window. You wouldn't see it with your physical eyes, and then rematerialize 3D. And this is transdimensional physics I'm talking about here, and it's very advanced physics. So, and it is physics. People call it paranormal or metaphysics. It isn't. It's a science. I mean, I always tell people, one man's magic is another man's science. Depends on your level of accomplishment and intellect and scientific knowledge, really. And humans are just, barely exploring the universe and the scientific world in the last couple hundred years. And we're dealing with civilizations that have been around hundreds of thousands to millions of years longer than we have. So almost every manifestation of an ET technology would look like magic to humans. Just like if we were to go and show, Thomas Jefferson my iPhone, it would look like something magical. And that's just 200 years ago, right? So think about technologies that are 10 to the 6th, to 10 to the 9th, 100,000 to a billion years ahead of where we are. Well, you're going to be dealing with some really strange stuff. And that's the other problem. It's a paradigm crisis. So that very first thing I do is to say, you have to look at this and then understand that there are three phenomena going on. There's the extraterrestrial, or pop term now used by the military, is non-human intelligence, NHI. Then you have, which is deliberately obfuscating for a reason I'll get into. And then you also have the man-made UFOs, right, or UAPs. 80% or more of all UFOs that people see are ours. My uncle had his whole career at Northrop Grumman, and he helped design the lunar module that landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong. So this goes back decades where we had breakthroughs in studying extraterrestrial ET tech and then creating copycats. So when we first broke through and started doing that in the 50s, they were pretty clunky, but they worked. They were anti-grav, electrogravitic, gravity wave, you might call it, generation. Now they're so advanced that even the people on the retrieval teams in the desert that I work with, who target and down ET craft and retrieve them, have said they're virtually indistinguishable until you get very close to them. The man-made ones from the ET ones. So, and then the third category, so you have ET, you have man-made, and then you have what are known as interdimensional or extradimensional phenomena, which, people like Congresswoman Luna has just gotten brainwashed by lunatics in the UFO subculture that it's all interdimensional. Well, what she doesn't understand is all ET civilizations to go from point A to B through the vastness of the cosmos, go out of linear space-time into other dimensions and back out of those dimensions into 3D, because you can't go in a straight line or in a solid state of matter across beyond the speed of light. Einstein was right. As you approach the speed of light, you take on infinite mass. And so you have to drop out into a state of masslessness. Masslessness means, boom, you've disappeared out of linear space-time and you're in another dimension. But at the same time, there are actual phenomena that are from another dimension. So an ET craft is traversing various dimensions. I call them transdimensional interstellar vehicles, right? TDIS. Man-made ones are not at that level, but they're pretty good at fooling people. And then you have phenomenon. It's kind of like that Netflix show. I think that was sort of a spinoff of a whole bunch of information I put out about 20 years ago called Stranger Things, where there were these bizarre things that came out of Montauk and other secret labs where they were tapping into these other dimensions, and these weird creatures, would pop into this dimension. I think things like Bigfoot and whatnot are interdimensional or extra-dimensional beings. So you have these three major categories, but no one's actually doing a proper categorization and understanding. And I know this sounds very intellectual, but I'm a trauma doctor. So if someone, in an emergency setting, if someone comes in with a heart chest pain, a bad doctor would say, "Oh, gee, it's a heart attack." Well, maybe it's a dissecting thoracic aneurysm. Maybe it's a pleurisy. Maybe it's a pulmonary embolus. Maybe it's a whole bunch of things. Maybe it's gastric reflux from the stomach. So what's happened in ufology and in this subject, the lack of just basic understanding has caused this confusion of the paradigm. I call it cosmological indigestion. And there's a cosmological understanding, so a whole new understanding of the cosmos and how it's structured that has to be, and it sounds esoteric, perhaps, but it's foundational, because if you don't understand that, you're going to confuse an extra-dimensional being with an extraterrestrial being with some weird man-made fake thing, right? And that's what's happened. So the first thing you have to do with each case and with any phenomenon is at least have an operating paradigm so that you can reach some level of truthful discernment. That has never happened, ironically. So that's one of the things that we try to bring to that. So when I go into I know the first time I was at the Senate Intelligence Committee, SCIF, a secure compartmented information facility. It's where top secret information is exchanged. And I was escorted in, and what I just told you was the very first thing I went through. Is that, you need to not get confused between. Now, this was shocking to him, because do you know that the right-hand people for the Senate Intelligence Committee chair and co-chair and the Armed Services Committee chair and co-chair had no idea that there were man-made UFOs? None. When I first met with them. Now they do. But that was a huge learning curve. But you have the same problem with the new president. You have the same problem with people in the House of Representatives who are just now looking into this, right? And they're get very confused. And it makes it worse because there are people who deliberately confuse them. They go up there to deliberately mix all this together in sort of a cosmic blender and then gaslight them. So that is a very dangerous game that's been played since the 1950s. Remember, I have a letter in our archive. People who want to see it, they can go to dpiarchive.com. We have terabytes of data that we release to the public, and everyone should study it. It would take you several to get through it, but it's basically everything I've ever collected is in this archive, except some of the information of people's, whistleblower names that we can't release. Because they don't want to be known publicly, right? And I honor those confidences. But what you find in there is that, we established this paradigm and these distinctions back in about 1990, 91. So before you were born, I suspect. And it's been ignored. And the problem is that without that understanding, you're going to get misled. And this is being done deliberately. In other words, if everyone at the Pentagon, say the new Secretary of Defense, Hegstead, who's new to all this, or the new National Security Advisory Team, or the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, if they don't know anything about the subject and people come in, this has happened, and they will then conflate the actual ET events with the man-made hoaxed events, with weird and scary extra-dimensional events, right? So it may be some boogum or something from the ninth ring of hell. I mean, it has nothing to do with ETs. It's a whole mix-up. That is being done very carefully and deliberately by operatives for this cabal that have kept this secret for 80 years. And I would say that 90% or more of all people who study this, who are not government officials, but just general UFO folks, have been completely confused by this mythology that's a false myth designed to confuse people, but more importantly, to have people reach false conclusions about the actual extraterrestrial civilizations. The goal of all of that deliberate obfuscation and confusion is to cause people to think, oh shit, we're under attack from aliens, or aliens are doing terrible things. Those terrible things people hear about are being staged by humans and are a psychological warfare operation. Now, how do we know this? Because we have people that we have debriefed who have been operational, men who have been on man-made UFOs, who have engaged in mutilations, kidnapping, abductions, human trafficking, etc. And now we have whistleblowers coming forward exposing this. But the general public has this misunderstanding, and there is a race from our team of whistleblowers and information and the disinformation folks like Luis Elizondo and others who keep pushing this false narrative. Now, the goal of the false narrative, basically what they're saying is, we don't have anything that flies like this. Any UFO in the sky you see is alien. Now, this is, of course, allows for people to think that any horrible thing that a UFO does is being done by extraterrestrials instead of by a counterintelligence PSYOP, psychological warfare operation, that's been going since about 1953. So I have a document from 1953 that describes using this subject for its psychological warfare purposes. I'm quoting from the document. It's in our archive. So anybody who can read, go there and look for it. And we have the archive organized into various categories, and there's a whole section on government documents, and they're organized by country and agency and all that. So it's in there. Now, the other part of this is and this has been the hardest thing to get through to, let's say, because this is all coming out. There are going to be hearings and more hearings on this. It's getting them to understand that these technologies are way beyond anything that you can imagine that we have. Now, you can imagine an extraterrestrial vehicle is going to be extraordinarily advanced, and it took a long time of studying the ones that we had shot down with energy weapons, directed energy weapons, to figure out how they work. But I'll give you a date. October 1954 is when we mastered what's called gravity control. And we then began to make man-made UFOs. Now, this astonishes people. I go, absolutely, this is true, and we can prove it. So that then opens up a whole question. How much of the phenomenon that people have ascribed to ET has actually been staged by those covert operations to fulfill the agenda that Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, said on his deathbed to my friend Carol Rosin. And he said, they are going to hoax an alien attack. They're going to create a threat from space, because what they want to do is unite the world, not in peace, not in enlightenment, but in interplanetary war, fear of something else. And it's moving the whole conflict game between races and countries and financial systems and economic systems, capitalism versus socialism versus communism versus whatever, anarchism. They're wanting to move that up to a higher level where the world gets united, but not in peace, but in a totalitarian, fascist approach where everyone is under the thumb of Big Daddy military industrial complex, which is exactly what Eisenhower warned us of when he left office in 1961. And he said, beware the military industrial complex. So the long game, and this has been a 70-year plan, is all about to break one way or another. All right. It's either going to break into a series of things that are going to stampede the world tragically into thinking we're under some kind of alien attack from outer space, or the truth is going to come out like I've described, and we're going to pivot to that being a singular moment that unites the world, but not in fear, but in peace and in understanding. There's a whole new chapter in human civilization that can open, that has free energy, that eliminates poverty, that these technologies are used for the good of humanity, that the environment is turned into a pristine state within 20 years, literally within 20 years, within your lifetime, maybe, God willing, my lifetime, if I live to be that old, we would see that. Now, the other path is dystopia of totalitarian endless war. So that's the real battle, and it's an information warfare. And I would say, unfortunately, it may come out the terrifying way, and then people will learn the hard way that we have to take another path. But if it comes out in the way that I warned about, then it's going to be catastrophic. It'll be an extinction level event for humans. And so this is why we have to be very careful right now. And this is why I've advised people, very close friends to the president. He's learning about this, but he's got to be extremely careful with what he says. Same thing with people in the Senate, the leadership in the United Kingdom, the European Union, religious leaders. I'm back channeling this messaging to leaders all over the world, saying we got to be very careful as all this begins to come out more and more in the mainstream media, and then eventually it's just fully disclosed, how it's spoken about and how it's looked at, because the dominant paradigm is one that would put us on a interplanetary war footing, which is the end of civilization as we know it. So I think the stakes are larger than people realize, and there's not many voices of reason out there. I'd say for every person saying what I'm saying, there are 1,000 people pushing the war agenda and the evil alien agenda and the conflict agenda. And guess why? That makes sense, because that's where all the money is. That's where all the power is. And people forget, in 1992, as a young doctor, the head of Army intelligence, who was a total fascist, offered me $2 billion to be on his team and be part of that group of little goose-stepping nut jobs. But I'm sorry, yeah, I'm very blunt. But I said no, gracias. I'm not interested. I said, stuff it up your ass. But I was not interested in that. And of course, he went to my wife and tried to convince her to convince me. And the way he couched it was that there's a board seat open on this international group that runs these covert programs, and we want you to be on it because you really understand it, and blah blah blah. And he was trying to buy me off. And now I was offered $2 billion. I know that I met with a man who's part of that, let's say, CIA cutouts, corporate people who work with that organization, and he told me point blank in '93 that they had given at least 10,000 people $10 million apiece or more to secure their cooperation with that agenda, this terrible agenda. And I know this to be a fact. So when you hear these people out there in the UFO sphere who suddenly have all this money and influence, or they're suddenly on 60 Minutes, CBS, right? Like Elizondo, it's because those people have been assigned to do that, and those doors have opened and pathways have opened because they're carrying the message, the false message of conflict and partial disclosure, false disclosure. So that's the real battle going on.
About a year ago to the date, I found myself in Miami. I was at the Forbidden Conscious Awards, where you were given the Lifetime Achievement Award. And you said that there was good news. You said that there is 500,000 years of human history that is about to unfold an entirely new era. And the moment you said that, it got you very emotional. There was an immediate standing ovation for you.
Right.
I got emotional too. I just connected with your mission strongly. So I'm really curious to know, you said that this year is an inflection point for what's coming. And these two timelines that you highlighted, what will it take for us to be on that timeline of love and of unity consciousness?
Well, it's a multifaceted strategy. There's what we're doing with the political, leadership, and with the public education, and then there's what we're doing covertly. So I'll have to be careful here, but there are law enforcement folks and special forces people who've been in the special forces of the military, who have left the military and have agreed to take on a very dangerous mission. And I'm providing the intelligence and information and a lot of the strategy of what they need to do. There are law enforcement at a senior federal level that have reached the same conclusion that I reached after I briefed Clinton's first CIA director. And that is that this is a criminal organization. It's the world's largest RICO, racketeering influence corrupt organization. And that all manner of crimes have been committed, and they are pursuing those as of this moment. And I'm very involved in assisting with that process. Now, the whistleblowers we now have over 750 some that I've debriefed over the years. There's a core of them that I'd say the top 45 or 50 that we've handed over to provide intel and information and to be interrogated so that they can get specific information on where these illegal operations are located, which underground bases, how to get in them, and how to neutralize them, take them out. Because these are very dangerous operations where extremely advanced technologies are tracking and targeting ET craft and downing them. And so one of the things that has to happen to create a clear path where we can have a peaceful dialogue and peaceful contact with these civilizations is to stand down this very dangerous covert organization that's gotten completely out of control. I mean, when I say out of control, nobody on the oversight committees or in the White House have any control over them. None. When I say none, I mean none. And so that is a very dangerous thing because they have technologies that are way more advanced than anything the mainstream Pentagon or even mainstream CIA can have. This is a very compartmented operation with enormous technology centered mainly in the corporate world and the big aerospace and contracting companies, such as my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, Raytheon, SAIC, Booz Allen Hamilton, EG&G, et cetera. And we know who they are and we know where their assets are. Okay, because I've debriefed people who have been whistleblowers bringing me that intelligence. Now, until a few years ago, I had collected this, but nobody wanted to pursue it. Now there's a very heavily, let's say, empowered entity that is pursuing it on behalf of the legal and constitutional government of the United States. So this is a very big and positive breakthrough, because if that doesn't happen, because the other part of this I'm going to get to in a minute is that the general public should be doing CE5 contact. That's this, because, and by the way, those of you who want to come, we're going to do a whole mass consciousness meditation and contact out in the desert outside Scottsdale on some Native American land in September 15th, 19th, 20th, and 21st. And you all can come. If you can't be there in person, you can be there the whole weekend by webinar. But what we're going to do is do a mass consciousness effect to make contact and to do meditations that shift human consciousness towards this good future, the sustainable future, the future of universal peace, not just world peace. So that's what that'll be. And the reason that's important is that when people come together in any number and meditate and visualize and see that and actually take action, it actually alters the whole consciousness of everyone on Earth. It isn't just affecting the people there, it's affecting everybody. So it's very powerful for people to come together and do that. But even with that, if you have a ball of, I hate to say it, sociopaths and psychopaths who possess that kind of technology, where they reverse engineered extraterrestrial electronics and systems that are hundreds of thousands of years more advanced than what the normal person knows about. And those have been turned into weapon systems. And those weapon systems are targeting ET craft and other places out in space, right? Because they're going beyond the speed of light. They're not going at the speed of a laser or light. They're going beyond the speed of light. These are quantum potential weapons that are scalar, that go way beyond the speed of light and are very dangerous. And these are under the control of not rational people in government, but by people who are power-hungry thugs, and they're deadly. And they kill people who get in their way. I mean, there have been people that, since I've been getting these folks read in or briefed, have had a couple of people who have been assassinated. And these people who are in special forces who have agreed to do this have actually done things to help move their families, and they've accepted the fact they very well could be assassinated. So, it's a very serious thing going on. But if that doesn't get, let's say, if we don't stand down those most dangerous aspects, how can we at the same time invite the ET craft to come in 3D, because they're going to get blown out of the sky, right? So the CE5 contact, I've known this for 30 years. So we've been doing CE5 contact. They do come in. They'll be in for a short time, or maybe they won't be solid 3D, and then they vanish. Why? Because it's dangerous for them to be 3D in an area, because the satellites, ground-based radar and systems, aircraft are going to pick that up and triangulate them and strike them. So I always tell people we need to be doing CE5 contact, but we also have to understand there are these very advanced weapon systems that are a threat to our visitors, to our friends from other star systems. So we have to be mature about it, not childish. You know, we can be childlike and pure-hearted, but we can't be childish. Childish is acting like, you know, all is right in the world and there's no threat out there. Well, there is. I mean, there's some very dangerous people with extremely advanced technologies. Yet, for those of you listening who are new to this, visualize the head, the very famous head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, which is the top secret aerospace engineering entity out in the desert there in California. His name is Ben Rich, and we have a letter from him acknowledging that there were both man-made and extraterrestrial UFOs from the head of the Skunk Works. It's in the archives. Go read it. Now, because I deal only with facts and evidence. And before he died, a friend of mine, James Goodall, who's a famous aerospace historian and writer, he talked to Ben Rich, and this is in 1995. And it was about a week before he died, and he had cancer. And he said to him, Ben Rich said, anything you can imagine, anything you've seen on Star Trek, we've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works, and it's out in the desert. And he specifically said, not Area 51. He was talking about a place where I have been, that's where there are underground openings out in the desert, where there's these vast complexes, where we have the most extraordinary technologies that have been reverse engineered from extraterrestrial technologies. Now, the good news is, here's the good news. Here's the peace dividend for this. Everything we need to create a civilization with free energy, no poverty, abundance already exists. It doesn't even have to be invented. It's already been done. The bad news is the worst people on earth, the most sociopathic thugs you will ever encounter, have it. That's the truth. And the president and people in Congress, I meet with these sort of folks, and they have no idea the extent to which this has happened, because it's been going on since Eisenhower's era. Because Eisenhower, by the way, trusted people he shouldn't have, and he's the one who lost control of those projects around 1957, 58. He was read in. President Eisenhower knew about the issue, so did Truman. At that time, things were being run relatively legally as a top secret program studying the technology. But once they got that big breakthrough in 1954 and mastered gravity control and realized they could build their own UFOs, right? They then started pushing Eisenhower aside because he wanted to disclose this. He wanted us to go to a more peaceful approach to the ETs and lay down our nuclear weapons and stop shooting at the ET craft, make peace with the Soviet Union. That's what Eisenhower wanted to do. And this group of warmongers said, oh, no, you're not. And they basically committed treason, high treason. And so that organization went off outside the Constitution and outside oversight and control in the late 50s, and it has never to this date been brought back under control. The only president who made a serious effort, there are two who made a serious effort to fix the problem. One was killed, and that's Jack Kennedy. The other one, Bill Clinton, who, when we first put this effort together, formed a team of people, of special forces, to try to take down these black illegal programs. But all those men were either killed or absorbed into the black world. It was called Team Red, is what Clinton had. And remember, when he got inaugurated in '93, the first thing President Clinton wanted to know about, one of the first things, is this issue. And then eventually I briefed his CIA director, his first CI director. And that's when I learned that the president, the CI director, and people like that were not being allowed to even get information on the subject, never mind control it. And that's the date. It was December 13th, 1993, was the date that I realized that there was a totally unconstitutional shadow government running things. Not a conspiracy theory, a fact. Now, most people speculate, but I started out 32 years ago briefing the CIA director for President Clinton. So I don't speculate. I know at that point, I knew for a goddamn fact that this whole operation, centered in these aerospace giants and in certain compartmented military and intelligence operations, had escaped the Constitution, the rule of law, and was an existential threat to humanity. So that was when my life turned upside down, frankly. As a doctor, it went, oh my God, now what? I'm trying to take care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and raise 4 daughters while taking this on, right? That's what happened 32 years ago. But, I've never regretted, trying to fix the problem. It's been very, very difficult, of course, but, and it's all coming to a head, I think, in the next 2 years, maybe 6 months. I know what's going on behind the scenes that I can't talk about, and it's coming to a real inflection point. So here's the choice. There is a bifurcation. We're on this path. Right now we're on a path towards what the Hopi prophecy shows in their Hopi prophecy line, sort of an end of things. But there's also another Hopi prophecy line that goes on forever, right? And goes up and out. So I think we're at this point where we humans, all of us together in our consciousness, thoughts, prayers, and doing CE5 contact, need to create a morphogenic field, an energy that sweeps the planet, that turns that curve towards the Hopi prophecy line that goes on forever, peacefully. It isn't going to happen by itself, my friends. It's going to happen by us coming together and making it happen, because this is a planet of free will. That's so humans born in the, created in the image of God. Well, what does that mean? It means that we can possess very high consciousness, but we also have free will, which means we can use it for good, or we can use it for destruction. We can create and sustain life, or we can destroy life. And at this point, we can save the planet and the biosphere and secure it for hundreds of thousands of years in the future, or we have the means to destroy it right now. Look at the movie Oppenheimer, and where he says, I'm the God, the Vishnu, who destroys worlds. Well, that was just the atomic weapon. We're dealing with technologies 1,000 times more deadly than a nuclear weapon that this covert group has. So these are huge issues that nobody is really talking and thinking about, because unfortunately, everyone's still at the stage of what I said at the beginning, kicking the tires of the UFO, not even knowing which ones are man-made and which ones are ET, or why the ETs are here, which is a very peaceful mission to try to stabilize and engage the Earth without invading it. That's a prime directive. It sounds corny, but they are not to just come in and do everything, because, it wouldn't work. Unless a species evolves organically, it isn't going to happen. So what I saw when I was a young boy, I had this amazing experience where I went out into the future and I saw the future. And I saw that there would be a time when I was older than I was then. I was maybe, I'm thinking 18 or 20, I don't know. And I saw a time where the U.S. military would be supporting peaceful CE5 contact and securing an area, and that the ETs would come, and there would be a daytime landing and event, just a small egg-shaped craft with an ET elder that the entire world would see. It was a crystal clear lucid dream. And I met my wife in a lucid dream. Everything important I have in a precognitive dream. And I've been like that since I was a child. Maybe it'd be the Cherokee. My grandmother was full Cherokee. So I think there's native people have that proclivity. Perhaps, or maybe was it wrung out of them by the priests in Europe, but whatever it is, I always had that sort of ability to see the future. And it was such a beautiful vision. And then I saw us going into this whole era where wars had stopped. We'd become peaceful on Earth, but we were also working peacefully with the ETs. And these technologies all came out. And it just created a totally new world, a totally unbelievable world. You can't even imagine the difference. So, I mean, in literally in 20 years, the world would be more different than now is from 10,000 years ago. So it would just be this huge transformation. Now, the other path could be taken where, we go into a very conflict-oriented situation, which is what's being pushed by ufology and the abduction cults and Elizondo and all those people. They want endless war, and they're trying to mislead people in the Congress and the White House, Donald Trump Jr. and others into that direction. So I think that this is a very big crisis of information, but also perspective. And we're going to have to all sort of fight against that false narrative, because the future of the planet is hanging in the balance. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic. You can't overstate the consequences. But even if we blow things, what I think will happen, it'll be like the Phoenix scenario, if we're going to Phoenix in a month, where out of that conflict and ashes, this Phoenix takes off and we reemerge. But it's a shame to have something happen where we lose 5 or 6 billion people, which is what that would be. A very serious issue here. I don't want to get too far into that, but the choice we have to make soon is grave, and will have grave consequences if we miss the window. There's a window and a way to disclose this and fix this problem, but we don't have 80 years. I mean, we've been fooling around since 1945 with this, when we detonated the first atomic weapon and the ET showed up and we started downing them. That was before Roswell. This has been going on since the mid 40s. And so we're at this point right now where we have this enormous civilizational choice that will have consequences literally for the next 500,000 years on Earth. So it's our choice. It's our collective choice. Now, one of the problems with people today versus some years ago, when people actually were activists on meaningful things, is that people just sit gobbling up nonsense with social media and YouTube and whatnot, and they don't do anything because they become passive. The screen makes people passive. People need to actually put their shoulder to the wheel. They need to go out, put their things down, go out and form a CE5 contact group. You can get an app that is a very extensive training program for remote viewing, doing CE5 contact, and it's in the app stores for iPhones and whatever the others are, Google or whatever. And you can really do it. I mean, we've had people who are just truck drivers in Croatia write to us, where they were pulled their truck over to rest at night and did it, and the crack would materialize and come over the cab and all this stuff. So, we need to have a huge group of people who begin to do this seriously all the time, so that we're showing the ETs another side of humanity. There's the side that they're always seeing, which is either ignorance, apathy, or violence being targeted. There aren't enough humans doing something enlightened and peaceful and proactive, where we go out and say, okay, the definition of a close encounter of the fifth kind, you can see the movie, by the way, is when you go out and you invite. I don't like the term call. You don't call them like a butler, right? It's
with a little bell.
Yeah, it's demeaning. I hate it when people say, "Oh, I'm going to call them." No, you're not. You're going to invite them as an ambassador. So we call this whole program we're doing in Arizona in September ambassadors to the universe, where we literally train people to look at themselves unofficially, but still it's like a people's citizens peace movement to become ambassadors from humanity to these civilizations in small teams. Now we're going to be doing it with hundreds of people, but you can do it with just a handful of people out anywhere quietly. And you'd be very surprised if you do it with a pure heart and a clear intention, that how frequently the ETs will show up in one way or another, because they're very eager to find humans that are not asleep, but also that aren't violent, just trying to shoot them down. So I tell people we need to be the front line. Right now, there aren't any ambassadors from countries or the United Nations assigned to this. So that's our job. Now, maybe someday the Secretary of State, who right now is Marco Rubio, he is actually one of the most knowledgeable people who had been with the Senate Intelligence Committee pushing investigations on this. And we provided enormous amount of information to him. And so you never know. I mean, by the way, our project is global and nonpartisan. He happens to be a Republican. He could be a Democrat. He could be I wouldn't give a rat's ass. I mean, it's irrelevant. Because the truth is, whoever is in power, we have to deal with them. And globally, it's the same thing. I mean, we deal with people all over the world in government. Canada, the UK, Australia, European Union. It's something that I have to do. And when I go to these other countries, I speak the same way. It's a very universal message. So we have to be very careful about it, not just being an American issue or a partisan issue. It has to be a universal issue. And I'm very, very careful about that. Because otherwise this whole subject could get sidetracked into another partisan shit show, or, a partisan conflict. And that's the worst case scenario, frankly. And I won't let that happen, at least under my watch. I mean, there may be people who will try, but it has to stay very nonpartisan, because it is a issue that affects every soul on Earth and the souls on other planets that are increasingly vulnerable to violent covert programs that have technologies that are reaching parity. They're almost as good as to what the ETs have. And that's dangerous because they're not being supervised and they're sociopaths. They literally are people who love war and conflict and the accumulation of vast amounts of power and money, irregardless of who they hurt. That is the very definition of a sociopath. So they're high-functioning sociopaths. I know them. I know some of them. And so I think that the good people of the Earth need to come together and show a different face of humanity to the ETs, right? And don't sit on your hands, folks, waiting for the Secretary of State or the President or the UN Secretary General. I always have said, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. We have to lead.
And Dr. Greer, we're also seeing this new generation come in that is very highly awakened, conscious. At the same time, we're getting pacified by all of these social media, TikTok, all of these things. So when you tune into the younger generations, what gives you, in a sense, hope that they could be the leaders that you've been looking for the last 40 years? And how would you educate them on that to become those leaders that advocate for peace and unity?
Yeah, well, step one, you need to be educated, which is also very not popular now because it requires discipline and time. And everyone sort of has a what I call digital ADD or ADHD, because they're all split all over the place with their digital devices. But I know I sound like a tough professor, but you actually do need to drill down and master the information, So think of this as something, it's like a home course of study going through our archive and the CE5 contact training app where you master it. So this requires some self-discipline to do. So that's step one. Step two would then do something. So, organize CE5 contact group in your area, but also write to your members of Congress or Parliament or the president and express that you want this taken care of. On our website, drstevengreer.com, there are actually draft letters for you to write to these people. When I meet with people in the Congress and also White House people, they say we really need to hear from the constituents. We really need to hear from the public. So we have to go into that next step of not just knowing about it, but then doing something. And that next step of doing something is where most people fail. I think that on this subject, it's so interesting. It's sort of a hobby for dilettantes and people who are curious, but not that many people are serious about it where they do anything. We need people who are going to be leaders and take it seriously, quite frankly. And there is encouraging signs. There are people who are in their 30s, for example, are younger than my daughters are now. My oldest daughter is just turning 45. And they're taking a real leadership role with the whistleblowers. So some of them are young Marine or Special Forces guys who are now have pulled out of the military and are working on this. And and people like Michael Herrera, who is a Marine who encountered one of these objects. Hopefully, we're hoping he will be at this event in September, because he is a major whistleblower who I brought to a number of meetings with the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Pentagon and the House Oversight Committee. But, and he was there when he saw one of these big man-made ones loading crated up humans that were being kidnapped and abducted for human experimentation, when he was on a rescue mission for the Marines in Indonesia in 2009 after that terrible earthquake and tsunami. So, we have those sort of people coming forward, and he's not just a whistleblower, he's also actively involved in organizing and working with whistleblowers and helping. So we need more people like that, to come forward. But I think everyone can form their own contact group. Why not? It's very low tech. You don't need much to do it. Anyone who is conscious can do it. If you're awake and you're a human being, you can learn to be aware of awareness, and then use that awareness of awareness to remote view or see remote places, and then turn it over into an active vector where you show the ETs where you are. It's like this Google Zoom, where you zoom into the earth, you show them where you are, and you invite them within the paradigm of peaceful contact. Not just you don't do it like, oh, I just want to be entertained, like I'm going to SeaWorld and see dolphins jumping through hoops. It should be a sincere wanting to be at service to this larger purpose, and in a pure-hearted way to be a contact, a peaceful contact to these civilizations. If you do it with a clear mind and a pure heart, they will contact you. The ETs will contact you.
It almost seems like the more evolved a civilization is, the more heart-based that civilization is. Have you noticed that in these types of contacts with these beings?
They're very. What's interesting, I feel like a one-man anti-defamation league for extraterrestrials. They're portrayed horribly in all the movies and UFO lore, but in reality, they're extremely intelligent, very peaceful, and they're very loving. I've been since I was 8 years old, had contact, and I've led thousands of people in events where we've had craft and ET beings show up even in our circle. If you look at the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, you'll see that. So what I have found is that they are universally, if they're allowed out of their solar system, they're very enlightened. And this is why humans can't go out of our solar system until we become peaceful. And they are very loving and heart-centered. And it's like that whole heart math, where it's the mind and the heart together. And now there are some that are let's call them the cosmic special forces guys that are, but they're like the special forces guys I know. I mean, you don't want to cross them, but they're actually big-hearted, brave-hearted people who are there. And, the one who's the leader of some of these, he came to my place here in DC a few years ago, and he gave me a pin that, like you wear special forces. And it said in Latin, to liberate the oppressed. And that is their motto. So the whole earth now is being oppressed, and humanity, by a cabal of nutty people who have run it into the ground and who want endless war. And so, I call these the good warriors. Well, there are ETs out there who are very enlightened, but they're also the ones who protect larger cosmic interests, other worlds. And I know who that species is. There's several, but there's one in particular assigned to Earth that's like that, and they're formidable. I will tell you that they're very formidable.
Do they have a name?
Well, I mean, I don't use the name. I mean, I know who they are, and we've had contact with them. We have some images of them. They're like 10 to 12 feet tall and mesomorphic. I mean, I'm a bodybuilder, but I'm like Tiny Tim by comparison. But they're amazing species, and that is their purpose. Their craft is usually a kind of boomerang shaped, or sometimes arrowhead shaped, kind of golden ship. And we've had those around us, and they're protective detail.
There was an attempt.
I know
on
this is
you.
getting into some weird stuff, huh? But anyway,
Not at all. Not at all. This is the sweet
stuff.
spot. But I wanted to bring up in Miami last year. You mentioned that there was an attempt on you in October, and as we talk about that in that sense, there almost seems like there's a spiritual protection around you and around others that are bringing this truth out to the world. What insights have you gathered around that spiritual protection that you receive and the others receive as well?
Oh, I have no doubt that it's, but I don't take it for granted. I mean, I accepted a long time ago that I could be killed at any time, but and I have had a few serious assassination attempts, but I think they haven't succeeded for various reasons. One is, I think there is this level of spiritual protection and ET protection. The other is that, I have a dead man trigger, which if I were to die, there are things that I have never discussed or released that would be released on blockchain through the internet and would be devastating for this cabal. And the other is that I think there are some people in the covert world dealing with this subject. Well, I don't think, I know for a fact, who have my back. And because they know we're doing the right thing, and they're in the shadows, and I know who they are. But I think that to the extent I've had those terrible things happen, it's more been a psychological harassment. Like, can I overcome it? And it, it's a speed bump, like a big speed bump you hit. And in October, it will be 2 years in this October. And someone sawed through the bolt on my bicycle seat, and it snapped off when I was going very fast on one of the Rock Creek trails out here outside DC. And I went down, and my left foot came off, and both bones were in the air. My left shoulder was ripped off, and my abdomen was split open. And I had four surgeries in about 3 months, and had to be, a lot of rehab. But I'm back to doing everything, although I'm staying off the bicycle. I got a PTSD. If a bike goes by fast, I go, oh. But it slowed me down for a few months. But it was tempered. And I've had other things similar. I had 3 people on my team. We all got metastatic cancer the same month. And I was supposed to die first. This was in 96, 97. But I survived, and the others did die. Very aggressive, weird. I think they were electronically induced cancers. And so, that's a long time ago, almost 20 years ago or 30. And so I sort of like, you get brick and mortar and wall it up and go forward, right? Just sort of, okay, that was terrible, but now what's the next thing? So, you got to be a bit of a spirit warrior. You can't take this on and be sort of and this is one that, let me get to this. This is one of the real problems with our leadership, is that you don't find many politicians, lawyers, wealthy business, entitled, privileged people with that kind of courage. Your special forces guys, yes, and certain people. But I'm telling you, if you move in this direction where you're making a big difference globally on this, you're going to have everything thrown at you. Like recently, I had several members of Congress tell me that there are a lot of them that can't talk to me because Lou Elizondo and David Grush have told them that I'm a Russian sleeper agent, that I'm a Russian spy, which is, of course, absurd. But these members of Congress, oh my God, we don't want to get caught up in a spy ring. And Dr. Greer is a Russian spy. I mean, just batshit, insane, crazy stuff, right? So this is constant, this psychological warfare and physical things. But, you know, in 93, when I said, well, if I'm going to do, or for 94, actually, is when I decided full steam ahead, damn their torpedoes, right? But it, you know, it has not been a pleasant journey. Some of it's been beautiful, particularly the CE5 contact part. That's what I love the most. But this other part of it has been terrible. You know?
Yeah. What other beautiful experiences have been brought to you on this path of seeking out this truth and bringing it to the masses as well?
Oh gosh, there've been so many. You know, we have a book called Extraterrestrial Contact Countdown to Transformation that goes through years of these contact experiences with our teams, and they're just beautiful. Like I know this is in the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind movie, but it was such a beautiful, and there are many stories like this. So we were up in this place in the mountains outside Tucson a few years ago doing CE5 contact with a smaller group, maybe about 25, 30 people. And there was a elderly gentleman who had almost total hearing loss since he was in middle school, I think, or a teenager. And we were in circle and we were doing our CE5 contact, and I heard behind me some footsteps. And so did, I had a friend next to me who is a younger guy about your age, who is a medical student. And then next to him was this older gentleman who had the hearing loss. And I said to everyone, we were in meditation, I said, there's someone walking behind us. Now, you could hear the footsteps, but it was cloaked. You couldn't see the person, the ET. It was an ET. And so to my left was David Marconi, who wrote Enemy of the State. If you saw the movie Enemy of the State, he did the screenplay. And a great movie about the National Security Agency. And a brilliant guy. He had a really high resolution Nikon camera on a tripod with a remote to turn it on. And I said, David, take a picture here. Because by then this ET had moved between the medical student and this elderly gentleman with the hearing loss. And in that picture is this ET with a very kind of praying mantis shaped head, triangular, and sort of a beak. But all we saw, it was interesting, with the naked eye, all we saw was a ruby red object like a teardrop. But the camera, because of their light cells, got the whole being. And subsequently that night, we continued, the being dematerialized, but was around us. The older gentleman stayed out till like the wee hours before dawn, kind of communing and connecting with this ET. And parenthetically, at the very end of this long contact he had, he said, you know, could you do something about my hearing? I'm not hearing a lot. And so he went to bed. The next morning, he woke up, totally normal hearing, completely healed. So this ET we call the healer, because he has appeared at various things. When my right-hand assistant in 97 was dying of metastatic cancer, like I was, he went in and put her into a state of where she had no pain ever. So, and he materialized in her apartment near Denver in Littleton, Colorado. So we've had the most beautiful things happen with ETs. You know, it's so opposite to what people portray them as.
Yeah, and What's interesting, a synchronicity that when we got on, I was telling you that I'm currently filming in Colombia, in Bogota, and there's a city called Buga aquí here in Colombia. um, what happened there? I actually was outside in my terrace, and I see these two. I saw two little balls. That sounds PG-13, but I saw them floating in the air. I took a video. I'm gonna send it to you after this.
Okay.
But that was in Bogota, and then I saw that something had happened. What you're covering in Buga? What
Buga,
happened
yeah.
there? Yeah.
Well, this is going to be part of a new film we're releasing. We hope this fall. So we're working on ultimate disclosure, and we're crowdfunding it. We need people's help to fund this because, we went down. I took a member of Congress in June down to Mexico City, where Jaime Maussan had brought back this Bugasphere. It's a spherical, almost certain it's an ET object that landed outside Buga, Colombia. And Buga is just a little town. And we ended up going there and examining it scientifically, and we took samples that are pending to be scientifically evaluated. But what's interesting about it, when it landed, it weighed about 2 kilos. It now weighs 10.1 kilos. Now, when I learned this and it was documented, now the scientists in Mexico City didn't understand what I was about to tell you guys. And that is, after it hit this high voltage power line, and it got zapped, there's a little place where it got melted on the southern hemisphere of the sphere. And it's about this big, weighs 22 pounds, 10 kilos. And it sort of floated to the ground. And this man went over and found it, picked it up. And it was cold to the touch, which is typical of your anti-gravity and 0-point energy. Instead of putting out heat and fumes, they're actually colder than the atmosphere. But over a course of a month or so, it gained in its weight up to what it eventually is stabilized at around 10 kilograms. So that is a more than 4 or 5-fold increase in weight, right? How does that happen? Well, this is called the electronics of this. We understand it. So what really happens with gravitational waves is that you're having an effect on the mass of an object. Say something normally weighs 22 pounds. When it's activated, the reason it can levitate and move in such extraordinary ways is that it actually alters the mass of the atoms to where it, in our one gravitational field of the Earth, begins to approach zero. Now, when it approaches full zero, it vanishes out of this dimension. But it can be like 0.01 in this dimension and be moving around. So it's virtually weightless. And it has its own ability to maneuver and whatnot. So we also found that there were, around the equator of the Bugasphere, if you go on my, you'll see this in some of my other videos, there was a polymer where there were these hair-like fiber optics that were embedded. And we're analyzing that polymer to see if we can do a carbon-14 dating on it. So you'll see some inscriptions on the outside. It looks like hieroglyphic writing. I think those were put on after it was made. Perhaps not even by the people who created it. We think the Bugasphere can be very old. And some reason they're being activated all over, because there's an area in South America where, the magnetic field of the Earth is sort of collapsing and changing. And I think this has triggered some ancient ET objects to know that we're reaching a very dangerous point in the stability of the Earth. And they're out investigating and monitoring and then relaying back out into space. That's my theory.
And the symbols on these on the Bugasphere looks very ancient. We'll put a picture on screen.
Yeah, they're very similar to some of the hieroglyphics. And interestingly, the day before we went to Mexico City, we had just interviewed a Green Beret member who had been in an underground base in Crane, Indiana, where it was called the Off-World Technology Office, believe it or not. and it was a naval weapons station, but underneath it was this secret base. And he saw a technology that looked like a tablet. And then as he approached it, it started putting up in the air these hieroglyphic symbol-like objects. And some of them looked very, very similar to what are etched onto the Bugasphere. Because when he described them, I said, well, so I pulled up a picture. We hadn't gone down yet, but pulled up a picture and said, yeah, it was this. He found like 4 or 5 of them that were very similar, or if not identical to what were being projected into the air, almost like a hologram from this ET communication device that was in this underground skiff, underground secret facility. So there's a lot of work to be done on it. But what we want to do is do some metallurgical testing to see if any of the metal is there's a specific type of testing you can do to see if the metal originated on Earth or from outer space. And then we want to do the carbon-14 on this polymer to see how old it is. And then we also want to do some work on the other aspects of it that I think it's going to require some more research with the fiber optic hair. You can get a hair-like fiber optic scope in there, like we use in medicine, and hooked with a camera and a big screen. So I recommended to Jaime Muson and the scientists there in Mexico City that they do that. I don't know what the progress of that is, but there are 31, I think, of these little teeny 4 millimeter holes around the equator of the sphere. But 2 of them from the CAT scans look like they communicate all the way in. Now you'd have to remove that polymer, and doing so would also alter perhaps some of those little fiber optics. But you could then go in there and see the interior of it, because there are some very interesting interior features on the CAT scan. But you really need to we don't want to damage it and crack it open. First of all, it's incredibly hard. I mean, the material is an aluminum something alloy that's harder than any aerospace material we have today. And it was definitely levitating and flying around, and a couple of them had come in and then dematerialized in blue sky and just vanished. So we know they're extraordinary, and most likely they are ET in origin. So that's going to be one of the things that'll be revealed in this new film, as well as a whole group of new top secret whistleblowers. So that we hope to come out this fall, but we need people to crowdfund it for us. We don't take in investors or do any capital like that, capital formation. It's all by crowdfunding donations. So,
and we'll put the link to that for people that really feel called to this mission, want to see that documentary. Yeah. And you mentioned something around the magnetic field of the Earth. What is going on there?
Good question. I think the Earth periodically goes through a cycle where the magnetic field changes, and the way that the crust of the Earth sits on the molten iron core, which is iron. That's where that spinning, and that iron core is what creates our magnetosphere, and it alters. But it can also be a prognostic indicator, a predictor of perhaps some serious Earth changes happening. Now, how much of this is due to things humans are doing, and how much it is a natural cycle, I don't know. But it seems to be, it's very curious that all these ancient spheres are being released or being activated. I call it activated because I think they've been around a long time. From looking at this, it was not a newly manufactured object. And that's the other thing about it. How we build something, it's like all these little, pieces and little things. No, this thing is a singular object that has, like, the metal of the sphere has woven in it all these fiber optics. And it's almost made as like a 3D printer and materialized. And this is typical of ET tech versus a man-made fake one, right? So when I examined it, because I was able to hold it and examine it and get magnifying stuff, and we had some scientists there taking the metal samples and these other samples, it seems to me is something quite extraordinary. Now, unfortunately, I think the movie will be finished before all these scientific tests get done, simply because they take forever to get put into these labs and get lined up. And we're moving very quickly. We want this film to come out this fall only because it resets the narrative. The subtitle of it is, with what's going on in the world right now, disclosure or deception. So part of what we want to do with this movie is to show the true disclosure and the truth, and then the deceptive narrative that's also going on at the same time, so that people begin to be a little suspicious of what the mainstream media reports. Because remember, the media is owned by the same BlackRock CIA operatives that control the internet. We just lost our TikTok account. We've been totally... Why? Because there is run by fascists. TikTok's run by fascists. You guys should all write to TikTok and complain. This is outrageous. So when I was in Mexico City, the night before we were going to leave, there were some armed officers who tried to steal the Bugasphere out of the vault. So I made a 1-minute video telling the public that this was going on, to kind of blow the whistle on it, and that we were standing up, and Jaime Maussan was standing up, extra security, and that we were going to investigate who these people were and see if there's videotape of them, find out who they are. And we have identified one of them, who is basically a federal police, Mexican federal police cartel member and part of a narco-terrorist squad in Mexico. And we know who he is. We've identified him. Our special forces people have identified him. But because I did that, that little clip got 2 million views almost instantly. And they deplatformed us. TikTok took us down, claiming that we violated their community standards, which we didn't. We were just doing a news break on something actually happening with an attempt to steal this very likely extraterrestrial device. And so our entire account, without notice, we were neutralized. And this has happened before, where we've been demonetized on platform and everything else. But I think people should be outraged by this. It's just happened in the last month or so. And I think that this shows that this cabal, it controls all media, including the internet. And so long as you're reporting rubbish that's not important, they'll leave you alone. But if you're actually telling the truth, you're going to get deplatformed. You're going to get harassed. You're going to get shadow banned. And anyone who look, I have friends in Silicon Valley. He says and what he said was, we all talk like hippies, but we act like Nazis. 100%. The tech industry is completely fascist. All big corporations and media, when you get too close to the truth on this, they're going to ban you. They're going to absolutely censor you. And if you think there's any media, left, right, or center, that won't, you're mistaken. That is a myth, right? So unfortunately, we have to, deal with this all the time. But I think everyone listening, even if you don't understand what we're discussing today, should be outraged at this level of censorship by TikTok.
Yeah. A few weeks ago, we had on David Icke, and I'm sure he can resonate with you on many fronts with the censorship. One thing that I wanted to just bring up with you real quick is I was in Egypt last year on the Giza Plateau. We did a private tour visit around midnight. And when we were leaving around 1 or 2 in the morning, I looked up and there was a craft that was V-shaped, black, with a bunch of lights on the bottom, hovering, making absolutely zero sound. And then it just stayed there for a moment, and then it just hovered by. It went across the other side of the pyramid. I didn't see it again. And I thought I had a genuine contact experience, but I'm thinking that there might be something else there, maybe something man-made. They were surveilling the Great Pyramid for some type of reason, maybe something related to what we did in there that night. I don't know, but what are your thoughts on that?
It could be either. Now, the ones that are ET, there can be ones shaped that are ET for sure, and they're completely silent. The man-made ones, but you'd have to be close to them, would have a humming sound like a transformer, or like a sort of a buzzing humming like a deep. Those are the man-made ones, and they can be the same shape. So one of the things that the aerospace giants have done is study the ones that are ET and what they look like in shape and make copycats so they can do a false flag, and sort of deceive people. But it's very hard to know without being close enough. So it can be either. Now, we do have a member of our team a few years ago. They were in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, and they went in there and were doing chanting. They were with a private group.
That's what we did.
And there was, interestingly, she was doing CE5 while they were chanting, and this emerald green sphere appeared inside that chamber and floated around and came around. Very cool, but not quite a solid 3D object. It was like a plasma light, like that was moving around. And we actually have that chanting when that CE5 happened in the Great Pyramid in our app, in the CE5 contact app. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I've never been there. My security people aren't wild about me going to places where there are a lot of terrorists, but so I haven't been, but someday maybe.
It's a very beautiful place, and it feels so ancient that it almost has me thinking, do you believe or do you feel that humanity in times of past has already been in contact with these extraterrestrial races? We've been a one universe, one people before. What have you learned about that?
I don't think we were one universe, one people. I think there were different cultures at different times that had very open contact, but it wasn't at the level where the entire globe, like we are now, interconnected, is making contact. This is a new level. But yes, for sure, I think all through the Americas, if actually, the Celtic with the Stonehenge, the pyramids in South America and North America, Native people talked about the star people and their contact. I think globally, we've never been alone, and there has been contact for millennia. I also know that there have been civilizations on the Earth that are as high tech or more than we are now, that have vanished in the past. And that I know a CIA scientist who actually works for a corporation that's funded by the CIA. And occasionally they will bring to him an artifact, a very ancient artifact that's found in the earth or at the bottom of the ocean or someplace. And his job is to find out what it is and what it might have done and how it worked. And he said some of them are ancient extraterrestrial objects, but some are ancient Earth-based objects that from a civilization that we've lost all track of. Maybe there was an antediluvian or before all those earth changes happened that, you hear about in the Bible and stuff, which I think did happen, by the way. And so not necessarily just as it is in those mythologies, but there was some massive Earth event. Because there's evidence that the Sphinx, which is much older than the pyramids, there's a watermark on it where the water went all the way up on it. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I think there have been some extraordinary civilizations for which we have very little record, but I think there is evidence for that, but it's been suppressed because it's like those objects on Mars that we discovered that were, there are obelisks and pyramids on Mars, and millions of years old, though, not thousands. And I had a Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, NASA guy tell me once, the reason we will never acknowledge that is that it would collapse the orthodox and fundamentalist religious beliefs all over the world of the creation myth. And I said, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard of. You're supposed to be a NASA scientist. I said, why do you have to go along with a fairy tale? And he said, no, you don't understand the power of those organizations. So he flat out admitted to me, yes, we have that evidence, but, big but, the powers that be want to keep the public ignorant about our ancient lineages on Earth, but also our ancient connection to these other civilizations out there. So in space. So yes, I think this goes back way before anything we would call recorded human history, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Greer, I wanted to ask you, what's a question that you wish more people would ask you?
I don't know. Um, I actually I wish more people would ask me, well, what we opened with. It's like all this comes out, and now what?
And now
Right?
what?
Now what? All right. It gets confirmed officially. To me, disclosure's already happened since some like 60% of the population believe we're not alone and the UFOs are real. That's a fact. I mean, there's in the recent polls, more than any president has gotten in an election. But I think that when it is officially acknowledged and it begins to be covered in the media as a big announcement, now what? And I think there has to be a very wise, a lot of people who are very wise and speak to this correctly and speak to it in a way that doesn't result in global panic and war. Because the narrative, to give you an example of what a big task this is, about 30 years ago, I was in North Carolina as an emergency doctor, and my youngest daughter was in first grade. And the teacher wanted me to give a presentation on UFOs, believe it or not. So I said, okay. So I did it and, did it for 6-year-olds. And the very first question, this is in North Carolina, Asheville. And the very first question from a child was, well, Dr. Greer, aren't you afraid to go out because won't they abduct you and torture you? Talking about the aliens. That was 31 years ago. Now, think about the extent to which people have been brainwashed by the CIA psyops regarding alien abductions and mutilations and horror films and all the garbage that constitutes ufology. Now think about that for a moment and think about how dangerous that is. And the same thing with, no offense, but David Icke, the reptilians controlling this cabal. Totally a false narrative and total bullshit. 100%, 1000%. These reptilians are man-made and or from another dimension. They're not extraterrestrial. And he doesn't even understand the phyla, the categories yet. So just forget that. Those of you who've been brainwashed with that poisonous nonsense. Because that is how you end up in World War III. There are the good aliens. There are the bad aliens. Let's have cowboys and Indians in space, right? And then the inescapable conclusion there is that you go to World War III. You justify World War III because there are bad aliens. So that is exactly what the narrative is. It's total nonsense. And so here this poor child, I don't know what she had seen or read, or it's just in the culture, right? But we're not talking recently. This is 31 years ago and a 6-year-old. So that's when I realized, boy, do we have a big problem. Because subliminally, everyone has gotten indoctrinated with this Manichaean world, this false narrative of us versus them and black and white, and this sort of binary good and evil alien stuff. And what they don't understand is that they're conflating man-made and interdimensional beings that are not extraterrestrial. And there have always been like stories of like troublesome little boogums from another dimension, ghosts and goblins. And then you throw in that covert CIA programs have technologies that can simulate an ET and simulate
like a hologram.
No, physical, 3D.
Physical.
Manufactured biologicals that have integrated circuits in their cerebral cortex. I'm not kidding. And so, unfortunately, I deal with the people who manufacture these fake aliens and who manufacture the fake UFOs that are man-made craft. And that whole narrative is something that has been pushed through society to the point that when this all comes out, the prevailing dominant paradigm is a false one that will lead to interplanetary war, which is the goal of the cabal. So this is a real problem, because if you posit that there are some of these civilizations like that, this would cause everyone who are militarists to say, okay, it's like the movie Independence Day. You ever see the movie Independence Day with Will Smith? Let's go kick alien butt. One of the biggest movies ever on this subject. And the whole narrative was written by CIA scripting, where the ETs were unveiled and the whole world was united as one in a final battle, interplanetary war. That is the false narrative. And if we go on that path, we're going to lose 5 or 6 billion people. I'll tell you right now. So we need to be very careful. We cannot be reckless with this kind of information. So that's what no one is asking or thinking about. What are the consequences of this being officially disclosed within the milieu, within the environment of this mythology and hatred and demonization of ETs and aliens? That has been running for 70 years. The decision was made in 1953, 54 to create this narrative that is a false one. And the outcome of it leads only to Armageddon. So, if that's what you want, have David Icke on your show again. But I'm just telling you right now, I'm not going to mince words. This is a very dangerous game being played. I think, forgive them, they know not what they do or say, right? People don't realize the danger of this demonization that they're engaging in. Because to the extent that people actually believe it, a false mythology, this is the stuff holy wars are made out of, right? So, for example, Tucker Carlson, who's a very close friend of President Trump's, has looked into this subject and had people who are fundamentalist Christians tell him that all the aliens are agents of Satan and are demons from other dimensions. So that's what he's going around saying. Totally false. 100% false. But if you believe that, the way David Icke and others do, that kind of narrative, where you end up is when it all gets disclosed and the body politic and governments of the world come around this, the result is going to be catastrophic, worse than anything you can imagine. So the people have to grow up. Grow the fuck up. I'm sorry to talk like that, but it's time for people to snap out of this nonsense. Because this is going to break. And when it does break, if it breaks in the wrong way, we're in a world of hurt, my friend. Catastrophic.
What do you think a 6-year-old would ask you today, 30 years later?
Oh, I think it'd be similar. Unfortunately, because the predominant, all the internet, all of ufology, all the media, all the movies are scary alien invasion movies, right? There are only a couple exceptions. Paul, E.T., the extraterrestrial, Close Encounters of the Third Kind from the 70s, Steven Spielberg, maybe 3 or 4, and there are hundreds of the other. And people absorb that into their consciousness, and it becomes part of their belief system. That's been done by design. I know people who have tried to do a true-to-life movie about what we've been doing, and every studio in Hollywood ends up being shut down on that project. They say, no, you can't do it. Because the big money people and the big media conglomerates say, absolutely not. So the only projects that make it through for the people to see are the false narrative ones that are terrifying. Yep, that's true. Because I know a lot of the top Hollywood moguls and people, they can't get it made. Even if they want to, they can't. Those the cabal of money people and media people say, nope, not going to do that one. That's true.
In your speech in Miami, you opened up saying that a lot of people say the phrase, many are called, but few are chosen. But you said that many are called, but few choose to answer the call.
That's it.
What do you believe that call really is that we're really talking about here as a whole to begin to wrap up the conversation? What is that call?
Well, I think it's something everyone has in their heart. They have to be in touch with their mind and their pure heart to discern all this noise from the truth, number one. And then they have to find out what is their calling. In other words, what is their highest purpose on earth and what can they do about it? So the example I use is there are many people, let's say there's a terrible disaster somewhere. Most people run the other way. some people choose at their own risk to go headlong into it to save other people's lives, right? So you have the self-interested cowardice, and you have the pure-hearted people who will rise, and people will call them heroes. I said, no, they're ordinary people who chose to do the right thing, right? Even at their own peril. So what I've said is that many are called, but few choose to answer the call, and we have free will, and we can choose to be sacrificial and altruistic and giving, or we can choose a path of just selfishness and narcissism and self-interest, which leads the world to what? To where we are. So I don't think that there's anything special about me at all. I think the difference is that I grew up in such abject poverty and abuse and neglect, and on the streets starving to death, literally in the North Carolina. Grew up in a shack with no heat or air conditioning. We had a kerosene heater in the hallway. And I had my own apartment in high school, washed pots and pans at a Red Lobster. Everybody thinks I came from some entitled background. I said, no, my father was half Native American in the South when that was not okay, right? And then I had a black girlfriend in high school. Almost got killed for having a black girlfriend. Run over by a car on my bike, I'm barely, jumped off. Anyway, but so, I was one of these renegades even when I was in middle school. I was a hell on wheels, I was a rebel. But I was always that way, but I didn't grow up with any particular privilege or anything, on the opposite, actually. But I decided I would take a path, but I used my own free will. So, and by the way, just to make this real for everyone, I wake up every morning going, am I going to do this one more day? Yeah, it's.
What keeps you going?
The vision I shared, where we have made it through this madness, and it's an amazing civilization here. It's an interstellar civilization. It's enlightened civilization. The earth is healed. There's no pollution. There's no poverty after about 20 years. I see that. I see we already have the means to do it. That's what's exciting. And so that's a message of great hope, actually. So I tell people, let's go with the vision of great hope and do that. But you're not going to do that by demonizing different races or species of ETs and then sliding into interplanetary war. That's not the path to peace, my friend. So I would recommend some discernment for those of you who do podcasts.
Yeah. And Dr. Greer, we end every show with a segment called the Final Trio, which are some rapid fire questions that we ask at the end. But before that, where would you send people to connect with you, with your work, the mission, the vision, everything that you're putting out there? Where would you send people to do that?
Well, we have a website. It's drstephengreer.com, but we have all our social media channels. We have YouTube podcasts we do. And you can get our newsletter and information for free. Just sign up. I think you also would want to go to dpiarchive.com. That's the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, where there's all this evidence, hundreds of whistleblower testimony, government documents, photographs, everything. Information on free energy, 0 point energy, etc. So I think you want to go and see those. I think people also, we have documentaries that you can see for free on Amazon Prime and Tubi and others, like The Lost Century. That was the last one that came out.
Amazing.
That pulls the curtain back on all this free energy. So I think people, need to look at those. We're an all volunteer. I have like 1.5 staff people. So we just do things as volunteers. So one thing people can do is examine all that and then share it in their social media links with all their friends and network. Yeah.
And you've been working with Kardashians, celebrities, so they're also helping get the message out there.
They do. Yeah, like Demi Lovato's been very sweet and helpful, and Chris Brown and Khloe Kardashian and various folks.
Yeah. Beautiful. So this segment, all the questions are personalized to the guests, to you. The first one is, what is the day in the life of a human living in the golden age look like?
Well, first of all, the work week will probably go to 10 to 15 hours a week. Secondly, there'll be complete abundance, where there'll be no paucity or shortage of anything, because you will have technologies that can create whatever material you need. And I think what will happen is that people, instead of just pursuing materialistic purposes, will very rapidly, not right away, but as a society and as a people, begin to turn to the pursuit of creative endeavors, and more importantly, the development of higher states of consciousness, the development of these spiritual capabilities and the ancient powers and abilities that are described in the Vedas, the Sanskrit Vedas with the cities, they're called. We'll be teaching these in Arizona next month. I'm going to go through the whole thing of how you remote view and manifest those cities, and it'll be a great weekend for people who want to come. So I think the average day will be so different from now, because you're not going to have, if a family, you have both parents working 40, 50 hours a week, as sort of slaves to this macroeconomic system we have. When these new sciences and technologies get out, assuming they're used for peaceful purposes, because that's the golden age, is that we're using it for peaceful, not violent purposes. It will be just an amazing world. And you'll be able to go from Bogota, where you are now, to Paris in, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes on these craft. And it just, interestingly, every community will be self-sufficient for energy and what they need, but will also be instantaneously connected to everyone on the planet, not only in terms of like the internet, but traveling. So it'll be a very different world. I mean, I could do a whole movie about that, the new world. That the ET, when the ETs met with Colonel Corso, said, and Colonel Corso said, when the ET asked for his help, said, "What's in it for me?" This colonel, this brash Air Force colonel in 1956. And the ET said, "A new world, if you can take it." If you can take it. So, I was 1 year old then. I was born in 1955. Why don't we go ahead and do it, man? It's like, enough already.
Are we getting closer?
Yeah, well, in fits and starts. We need to pick up the pace very quickly here, I think.
If you could offer humanity one practice to accelerate our awakening of consciousness, what would it be?
Meditation. Any meditation where you experience the singularity of consciousness in its quiet form. Doesn't matter. I mean, I know I had a friend who was a doctor, and she got into that state by playing the harp and closing her and being with the tones of the harp tones. I use a mantra meditation, and I do sort of a Zen breathing technique that I teach people. I'm not attached to the technique. I'm attached to what the result is. And the result should be anything that enables you to center into a state of calmness, where the mind is just pure and in its pure state of Samadhi, basically, where you're just aware of awareness. And when you experience that, then you can begin to utilize that capability to see remote places, remote times, do remote influencing, be guided spiritually. So that, I think it's very important for people to do that every day. And, when I died when I was 17, I had a near-death experience, was deathly ill. And after that, I had this amazing experience of cosmic consciousness. And after that, I vowed I'd learn how to get to that place without dying and being so sick. And I did. And I began to learn meditation. And before I was a doctor, some people don't know that I was a meditation teacher back in the day, back in 73, 4, 5, 6, back in 50 years ago. But it was great. I had a great time doing it. And so I still teach that. So I still teach this meditative techniques, and I think people really need to do that. But do it regularly, and do it, a couple times a day. Do it before you go to sleep, where you ask the Great Spirit to open your awareness, to have lucid dreams and guidance in the dream state. Like the Aboriginals in Australia have dream time. The Native American, the Cherokee, my grandmother's people had that dream time. So I think that everyone can do that, and you can have huge leaps in spiritual development that way.
And the dream that you mentioned that showed you that event in that future.
Yeah.
And
hopefully
finally,
that'll be soon, we hope.
Yes. If you could leave behind one spiritual teaching that transcends time, what would it be?
The science of consciousness, the understanding of the mind and the conscious spirit as being infinite and unbounded. That is universally known. It's across all spiritual religious traditions in one form or another. I think that what a lot of people forget is that you don't have to go anywhere to find it. It's the nature of your own consciousness at this moment. Because I'm awake, you're awake. If you begin to think what the consciousness itself, not our ego, not our intellect, not our personality, that's all different. But the actual field of consciousness is one. And that is a universal teaching, ancient, and it's the foundation for a universal and peaceful civilization in the future.
And finally, I just wanted to honor you, Dr. Greer, for answering the call and guiding us as a light to answer the call as well.
Thank you.
You're a huge inspiration for me, and I know a lot of us listening, and I just wanted to, from the heart, appreciate you for that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for and thanks for your help and helping us get the word out. I really appreciate it.